Bonjour à tous, c'est un test des micros de la salle W.
It's red.
Then it's right. Then it's working.
Good luck.
It's active.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Just like yeah.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to the second edition of the Geneva debate, back at the WTO's Public Forum. My name is Shruti Lal. I'm the president of the Geneva debate, and it's an absolute honor to be back on this stage after one whole year of telling all our family and friends that we actually hosted a debate at the WTO's Public Forum in Room W at prime time, and it was live telecasted. This was, it made big headlines in my South Indian family, and it raised the threshold for coolness, and we are ready to be back and forward and upward to bringing the roof down this debate as well. For those of you who are watching us for the first time, the Geneva debate is an initiative born out of the Geneva Graduate Institute from eager minds who wanted a safe space to talk about the most pertinent issues our generation is inheriting with both grit and grace. The motions of our debate changes every year, and it depends on what is of most concern to us, ranging from the EU's CBAM, like we did for the debate last year, migration policy, nuclear stigmatization, issues that need to be talked about openly, freely, intelligently, and truthfully. For this public forum, the motion is, this House believes the moratorium on customs duties on electronic transmissions should be renewed. I repeat, this year, the motion for this public forum is, this House believes the moratorium on customs duties on electronic transmissions should be renewed. While the rest of the kids our age were out and about this entire season enjoying their brat summers, some of us were more mindful, we were more demure, we were having a debate summer. So ladies and gentlemen, in a short while, you are going to witness a fiery debate from the very young people who are going to be at the helm of this institution, of this organization in due time. But before we get into the debate, let me introduce our adjudicators for today. You have seen them, you know them, they are the best and the brightest in the business, but let me flex their credentials one more time. I'm honored to welcome back Yasmin Ismail to be our adjudicator again. She is a senior policy advisor at the Forum on Trade, Environment and SDGs, and an independent expert on digital trade. Prior to TESS, Yasmin was a program officer at CUTS International Geneva, leading research projects and providing advisory services on WTO issues to various Geneva delegations and capital officials of developing and least developed countries. She was also CUTS Geneva's focal point for the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, and actively engaged in research and dialogues on climate change negotiations and their implications on trade. Previously, she served as MENA Projects Manager at the Global Partners Governance, a London-based international consultancy on strengthening political institutions, and the International Cooperation Specialist at the Egyptian Cabinet Information and Decision Support Center. Yasmin has been a consultant to many non-governmental and international organizations, including the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, the Diplo Foundation, and the European University Institute. It is great to have you back, Yasmin. Dr. Mona Paulson is an assistant professor at the London School of Economics and Political Science Law School. Her current research focuses on the law and political economy of trade, international development, and economic security, with a particular interest in drawing from archival research to assess the ideas, interests, and norms that form claims of security. She is on the editorial board for the World Trade Review and co-chairs a working paper series on international economic law and policy. Prior to joining LSE Law School, she was a postgraduate teaching fellow at Stanford Law School and Emile Noel Fellow at the Jean Monnet Center for International and Regional Economic Law and Justice, New York University, and practiced law in Canada. Dr. Paulson holds a PhD in International Economic Law from the Dixon Poon School of Law, KCL, and an LLM in International Law from the George Washington University School of Law. Thank you for accepting our invitation, Dr. Paulson. We're thrilled to have you here. Next up, we've got Dr. Jean-Yves Remy. She is the director of the Sridhar Ramphal Center for International Trade Law, Policy and Services at the University of the West Indies Cave Hill campus, Barbados. She coordinates and lectures in the SRC's Masters in International Trade Policy program. Dr. Remy's research interests include WTO and Caribbean dispute settlement, regional integration, climate change, women, and trade. She is a WTO chair, has served as a panelist in WTO trade disputes, and is on the roster of arbitrators on European and UK FTAs. Dr. Remy is co-lead of the Remaking Trade Project, a board member of the Caribbean Women in Trade, and co-president of the Trade Lab Network of Universities. She sits on several international boards, including the Journal of International Economic Law, the John Jackson Moot Court Competition, the Center for Inclusive Trade and Development at Georgetown University, and the Journal of African International Economic Law. Absolutely thrilled to have you on this panel, Dr. Remy. Thank you. And now a series of thank yous to some people who helped me weave together this session. I'm grateful to the entire team at the World Trade Organization's Public Forum, especially Javier and my friend Aurelie. Thank you so much for giving us this space, for answering our little doubts and queries, and for making time for us. I extend my gratitude to my directories of IHED, Marie Lotsar, for her constant support and encouragement. To Mario Stokes for always making time for me to brainstorm with the spiciest issues in the world of trade, which eventually led to the formation of this motion. Thank you very much, wherever you are. And my amazing team, the executive board of the Geneva Debate, Iman Alwan, our communications director, our debate coach, Ansi Lee, our events director, Sebasish, who is not here at the moment, but I best believe he is watching online at the wedding party in India. To our volunteer and photographer, Arco, thank you so much in advance for the updates that we are going to be posting on LinkedIn. Make us look pretty, Arco. And I'm always pleased to partner with the Geneva Trade Platform and the wholesome team that they've got over there, Juanita, Joanne, Yasmin, and of course, the Geneva Debate's favorite man and our bestie, Dmitry Grozybinski. He's not here at the moment. He is being swarmed with a bunch of fans getting their copies of his book signed, Why Politicians Lie About Trade. It feels like you are looking right into the black box of the world of trade, but with guaranteed giggles and laughs. So please go read the book if you haven't. And this year, I am pleased to welcome the team from the World Trade Institute in Bern to compete with the Geneva Graduate Institute on such an important motion. And I extend my gratitude to the Directorate in Bern for making this happen. And thank you all for being here, the spectators of this modern day Colosseum, for making this happen. Thank you for your interest in the speech and perspectives of young minds. Thank you for bringing us back here on popular demand. And I know you will not be disappointed. And without any delays, I would like to hand over to our moderator and debate coach, Ansi, to get down to business and to declare the debate open. Enjoy the show.
Thanks, Shruti. Good afternoon, everyone, and everyone online. I hope I can be heard clearly. So for this debate, we have a new format adapted from parliamentary and public forum debate. We have two teams composed of 3 members. Sitting on your left from WTI, they are the proposition side, arguing for the motion. Sitting on your right is the team from Institute, arguing against the motion. So we have the first speakers will give constructive speeches in which they are expected to define the debate, define the motion, and advance arguments, major arguments for their side. Following that, these 2 speakers will then have a crossfire. So crossfire is something very new to Geneva Debate as well. In crossfire, they will take turns to ask and answer questions. So the second speakers will then give a rebuttal speech. In rebuttal speech, the second speakers will rebut the case from the other side and advance new arguments or defend the arguments from their previous speakers from the same side. And then the second speakers will have the second round of crossfires. The third speakers then will give a summary speech to summarize the whole debate into major clashes and highlight some major points from their team. And the third speakers will then have the third and last round of crossfire. To conclude the debate, we will then have a reply speech, a shorter speech, to highlight some major ideas and thoughts from this debate. As for timing, so for constructive rebuttal and summary speech, the time will be 5 minutes. have a mallet here. So I will knock once when it's 1 minute and 4 minutes. I will knock twice. I hope it's clear, when it's 5 minutes. So speakers should stop at 5:20. So after 5:20, I will invite the audience to clap to stop the speech, unfortunately. So for the crossfires, we have 4 minutes for questions and answering the questions. So I will not disrupt the crossfires during the questions, but I will knock twice when it's 4 minutes. Same, the crossfire should be stopped at 4:20. And then for the reply speech, the time is 2 minutes, just to highlight some major points. The debate will be judged primarily based on the matter of the debate, namely the content, the argument, the quality of the argument, and the evidence and proof of the argument they gave. But also, we will also take into consideration the manner and method of the debate. That means the style of the debate and also the structure of their arguments in general. So this is basically the structure and rules for this debate. Without further ado, now I invite the first speaker from proposition side, Francisco, to open today's debate. Here.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here. Madam Moderator, honorable jury, and distinguished audience. I will start by saying that our side supports the renewal of the moratorium because of one fact. It is good for developing economies. As we all know, in 1998, the membership adopted the moratorium and has been renewed multiple times ever since. We recall that under the moratorium, all customs duties on electronic transmissions are eliminated. And in a more recent development, the JSI on e-commerce has also included a moratorium in the text of the e-commerce agreement. Our position is clear and boils down to 3 simple arguments. First, the moratorium creates access to more markets for developing countries. Second, the benefits of the moratorium outweigh the cost. And thirdly, the moratorium promotes economic growth and inclusivity. As I said before, the moratorium benefits developing economies by expanding their digital horizons. Actually, a 2023 multi-agency paper argues that countries like India and China already have an important share of global digital trade. Moreover, the same paper argues that countries such as Malaysia, for example, are currently experiencing growth in digital exports. All of this was made possible by the moratorium in place, and therefore, we argue that we must build on the success that we already have and move forward from that point. So please remember this: the more in moratorium stands for more access to markets. Moreover, duty-free digital trade is overall better for society. A bit of context is needed. One of the main arguments for opposing the moratorium is actually the foregone revenue that countries do not collect from not imposing customs duties on electronic transmissions. However, in 2019, an OECD paper stated that this loss of revenue is actually offset by consumer welfare. In this context, consumer welfare is a very simple concept. It means that consumers are going to be able to buy more products for less money due to the duty-free environment. Most importantly, when it comes to digitizable goods, this benefit or welfare amounts to a huge amount, which is actually $1 billion per year. So with this in mind, for us, it really doesn't make sense to levy customs duties, levy electronic transmissions with customs duties. So remember this: the moratorium also stands for more welfare. The moratorium also generates economic growth and inclusivity. Again, the OECD in 2023, in a paper, argued that Indian SMEs that use digital inputs actually become more productive. More broadly, using digital inputs, which are mostly imported, so subject to duties most of the time, create more competitiveness in firms. In turn, this competitiveness generates economic growth. So, by lifting the moratorium, we would be making these inputs more costly, and therefore, all the gains that we had for competitiveness and growth will be gone. On the other hand, firms also become more inclusive when using digital inputs. According to the mentioned OECD study, small firms that use digital tools, such as web pages, for example, actually become more likely to export, and even more so when they are women-owned. Again, by lifting the moratorium, we would be putting a barrier to trade, and therefore all the gains that we had for inclusivity will be gone. To wrap my intervention up, we know that the moratorium stands for more benefits. It stands for more access to markets, more growth, more well-being, and more inclusivity. And this is precisely why it should be renewed. Don't get us wrong, we don't think that the moratorium is a philosopher's stone that is going to solve all the problems just by magic. But on the other hand, we also acknowledge that the moratorium is an essential policy toolkit. It's an essential item in the policy toolkit. In turn, getting rid of the moratorium will simply not fix all the problems. Because of this, we must use the moratorium to build upon the success that has already been achieved, and from that point, move forward to progress. So far, we have seen just now how much we gain from the moratorium, and after my intervention, my fellow team members will delve into how much we lose if the membership fails to renew the moratorium. Thank you.
Thanks for the speech. Now I invite the first speaker, Agdeep, from opposition side to open ops case. Here.
Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed jury and colleagues, imagine a world where the rules of the trade are so ambiguous that no one knows what the rules are, let alone their fairness. A world where only a select few benefit while the majority are left grappling with uncertainty and loss. With the rapid evolution of frontier technology outpaces our ability to regulate it fairly. Is this the future we want? That's the question that we have to answer today. The intentions behind this moratorium may seem noble, but it is fraught with significant issues that undermine its effectiveness and fairness. While the proponents have emphasized the significant benefits that this moratorium will incur in promoting the growth of the digital economy, my team and I stand before you to argue that it is time to reconsider and ultimately end this moratorium for a better world. We strongly believe that this moratorium, once a forward-thinking policy in the infancy of the internet, has now become outdated and problematic. Today, I'll outline the core arguments that our team will present. I will address how the lack of clarity on what constitutes electronic transmissions creates legal and practical challenges for nations. My teammate, Sania, will then delve into the detrimental impacts and prove to you how the moratorium continues to widen the digital divide. And lastly, Jingle will argue and summarize the harmful consequences of continuing this moratorium and how it exacerbates existing inequalities. Let me begin by addressing the elephant in the room. The ambiguity in the term electronic transmission, and consequently, the defunct moratorium. Interestingly, every study, including the ones mentioned by the proponent, comes up with a different definition and therefore a different scope of the moratorium. This ambiguity is just not technical, but also casts legal implications while developing coherent trade policies. How can we expect countries to play by the rules when the rules themselves are a moving target? The proposition contends that electronic transmissions are narrow, but consider this: under the current moratorium, an electronic transmission could refer to anything and everything from software and ebooks to streaming services, cloud computing, or the transfer of data itself. However, no one really knows what these terms truly encompass. I wonder if the Zoom communication you and we all use is data flow. Are the people watching this debate from all around the world partaking and engaging in electronic transmission? Well, the lack of specificity of the terms constituting electronic transmissions leaves countries uncertain and confused regarding their commitments with respect to custom duties, which is an essential component and concept that is not purely about economics and numbers, but carries with it social implications. This directly leads to questions of equity and fairness in the global digital economy. Does this moratorium create a level playing field? Well, absolutely not. It disproportionately benefits developed nations while sidelining the interests of the middle and low-income economies. The United States and European Union, home the majority of leading tech companies are reaping substantial revenues from digital goods and services without contributing fairly to the economies of importing countries. Does this promote fair trade? I argue not. WTO's 13th ministerial conference specifically calls on members, and I quote here, examine additional empirical evidence on the scope, definition, and the impact that the moratorium will have on the development and how to level the playing field for developing and least developed country members. This, ladies and gentlemen, itself means that the moratorium does not create a level playing field. Today, developing countries stand to lose up to 10 billion US dollars in potential tariff revenues due to the moratorium. That's 10 billion US dollars that could have been invested in healthcare, education, and infrastructure. With rapid advancements in AI and digital technologies, more physical goods will soon be transmitted digitally. This means more products could bypass custom duties, undermining the trade agreements that countries have relied on for centuries for fairness and balance. This ambiguity not only undermines the sovereign authority and right of countries to regulate their own economies, but also hampers the essence of the Marrakesh Agreement, which promotes fair and equitable competition and development. Therefore, ending the moratorium on custom duties for digital transmission represents a vital step towards reglobalization by helping rectify trade imbalances and promote a more equitable global trade system. Thank you.
Thanks for the speech. Now I call upon the first speakers to start the crossfire. Just a reminder that the questions should not exceed 20 seconds and answers should not be more than 40 seconds. Please start when you're ready.
The purpose of any trade agreement is to get rid of inefficiently high tariffs. Lifting the moratorium would create the opposite effect, a tariff Wild West. How to avoid these inefficiencies without the moratorium?
Well, concerns about costs and uncertainty can be effectively addressed with modern technology, the one that we're actually debating today, and clear, consistent policies. Implementing custom duties on electronic transmissions can leverage automated systems, AI, to minimize administrative burdens and ensure efficient collection processes. Moreover, establishing a permanent and transparent duty framework, which is what we are debating for, will eliminate uncertainty, encourage investment, and foster innovation. I wonder if you can clarify if, well, like I mentioned before, if Zoom communication that we're using today is data flow, or if the people watching this debate online are partaking and engaging in digital transmission.
Thank you for the question. Yes, absolutely. An electronic transmission is any transmission that can be transmitted through an electromagnetic means. And therefore, we find support for this interpretation in the text of the moratorium and also by the subsequent practice of the members. First of all, the moratorium can be interpreted with a broad perspective, which includes goods and services. And moreover, the subsequent practice of members not imposing customs duties on products or services that are digital supports additionally this interpretation. So answering the question, yes, they would be included. Encryption is now everywhere, and it makes it almost impossible to distinguish imported from local electronic transmissions. How can governments feasibly impose customs duties given this reality?
Well, that's the reason why countries have been debating about this moratorium since 1988. And while we are trying to be experts, we really aren't the biggest experts. We are just doing our best. And what countries can do is still debate, argue, and raise the points that have been time and again brought forward. Thank you.
All right, thanks for the crossfire. Now invite the second speaker from proposition side, Gori, to start. Here.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm here today to rebut the case of the opposition.
But before we dive into the details, we must address the opportunity cost. Economic growth, business productivity, innovation, national competitiveness, and ultimately jobs. That is the opportunity cost of terminating the moratorium. While my colleague laid out the benefits of the moratorium, I'm here to explain the effects of terminating it. I will be addressing 4 key points in my rebuttal. First, the definition of electronic transmissions. Second, lost revenue. Third, inclusivity. And finally, the developed versus developing debate. With respect to the definition of electronic transmissions, while they viewed the lack of precision of the e-commerce moratorium as a challenge, we consider it to be a strength because it allows multiple views to coexist. It is for this reason that the moratorium has been continuously renewed over a period of 20 years because it offers certainty and predictability in trade. It is the only multilateral rule when it comes to digital trade. Over the past 20 years, WTO members through practice have demonstrated as to what constitutes the scope of the moratorium. Moving on to my second point, which is lost revenue. The opposition claims that they're losing out on revenue, but let's break that down. Firstly, the lost revenue is relatively small and it is largely offset by economic gains. As per a 2023 report by the OECD, the WTO, World Bank, IMF, and UNCTAD, the potential foregone customs revenue corresponds to less than 1% of the government revenue for developing countries. Members' concerns regarding revenue loss can be mitigated through internal taxation measures such as value-added tax or goods and services tax. In fact, developing countries are already applying such measures, and one such example is Chile. Chile collected nearly $481 million in the first 22 months of implementing such a taxation. Secondly, the opposition speaker mentioned that the lost revenue is around $10 billion. However, it's important to note that figures cited by the opposition are questionable and overstated. It's because the opposition's figures mostly rely upon reports by UNCTAD and the South Center. However, they are inflated primarily due to the methodology used in these reports. And one such assumption is that the internet never came into existence and prices on software and content remain the same for a period of 20 years. But let me ask all of you a question. Will the prices of candles remain the same for 20 years? In my opinion, the answer is no. How do I know this? Well, we're all sitting in a wonderfully lit room due to the invention of electricity. The focal point here is that the assumption that somehow inventions can be uninvented or that prices will continue to remain the same is not tenable. And it is for these reasons that we disagree with the lost revenue figures arrived at by the opposition using these reports. Coming to my third point, which is on inclusivity. The opposition speaker said that only big companies reap the benefits of the moratorium. We disagree because the moratorium is particularly beneficial to MSMEs and infant industries. Customs duties are disruptive and costly, leading to fragmentation of the global digital market, which would hurt these industries the most, if not prevent them from engaging in e-commerce altogether. To put it simply, tariffs come at a cost. And these prices and these costs are paid by consumers and small producers in developing countries that use digital transmissions as inputs and in turn demand less digital goods and services. As per a 2021 UNCTAD report, such fragmentation reduces market opportunities for these industries to reach worldwide markets, including missed opportunities for inclusive development. And finally, coming to the last point on the developed versus developing debate. The opposition paints a picture of developing countries being the victims of the moratorium. So let's look at data belonging only to developing countries. 3 in particular: India, Indonesia, and South Africa. GDP. India would lose 49 times more in GDP than it would generate in duty revenues. Indonesia 160 times and South Africa over 25 times. This is not just a loss, it's a catastrophe. Coming to tax revenues. The loss of tax revenues is estimated to be 51 times larger than the tariff revenues for India, 23 for Indonesia, and 12 times for South Africa. To conclude, the moratorium isn't just beneficial for developing countries, it is essential for them. Thank you.
Thanks for the speech. Now I call upon the two speakers to start the second round of crossfire. Oh, sorry. Can I invite the second speaker, Sania, from opposition side? Here.
Ladies and gentlemen, today at this very moment, we all stand in the William Rappard Center, where trade negotiators of the world sat down to deliberate regarding this moratorium. And I wonder if they sought to allow the few, those who have the privilege of being technologically literate, to dictate the electronic transmissions and terms of trade for all. Is this the inclusivity multilateralism poses? Is this how the blanket moratorium will respect the multilateralism that respects the needs and concerns of different countries at different levels of economic development? I argue not. To do this, I will do three things: state, prove, and summarize the blatantly ignored aspects of the blanket moratorium. What the proposition blatantly ignores and disregards is the opportunity cost, the cost of giving up sovereign policy space, economic independence, power. And I wonder if those such as the proposition sugarcoating the more in the moratorium have considered this. A cost not paid by all, but by those who do not possess the privilege of tackling the undefined evolving electronic transmissions. So I urge you to keep this question in mind when you hear the proposition next. How is this moratorium beneficial for multilateralism that is supposed to respect varying economic developments and capacities of various countries? We need to step aside from the utopian moratorium and face the reality. The reality is that we are not all equal. Around 3 to 4 billion people, that is half the world population, do not have access to electricity or the internet. People in Africa do not have electricity. Therefore, we must not be swayed away by small percentages and reports prepared by those who have and live far away from the reality. But what does this reality mean for us? It means three things. Firstly, this moratorium and its mechanism contradicts its own primary goal. The moratorium was to find and help prevent taxation of custom duties till certainty regarding electronics transmissions was to be achieved. Instead, not only does it make general and quite unreliable promises, but it also does not provide for any specific plan of action for the future. I suppose that such a shift would require the proposition to overcome the idea of the moratorium as a bargaining chip. Secondly, while many struggle to develop their digital infrastructure, they are derived of a vital source of revenue, custom duties. In the last 3 years, the moratorium has costed a total of 48 billion USDs in losses of 44 million, 14 million, 1 billion USD in South Africa, Rwanda, and Nigeria, to name a few. This number is only going to grow, ladies and gentlemen. In the next 2 years, it's estimated to be worth USD 365 billion USD. Therefore, if trade is just about money, as the proposition contends, then clearly the moratorium is making more loss than profit. The proposition poses a rosy picture and disregards the reports of South Center and UNCTAD, but that's because it does not choose to look at the full picture. The reality that we're dictated by bound tariffs and not by applied tariffs, as contended by many reports suggested by the proposition. Now, some misconceived notions suggest that value-added tax or VAT can overcome this loss. Well, VAT and custom duties are not mutually exclusive. They are not close substitutes. Unlike VAT, custom duties are applied to imports on electronic transmissions. Rwanda, for example, could gain an additional 14 million USD just by applying custom duties on electronic transmissions, as opposed to the 11 million USD from VAT. Further, as seen in Indonesia, the policy space on applying custom duties can allow countries to undertake more active policies to facilitate catch-up and bridge the digital divide by giving them the flexibility to apply custom duties on electronic transmissions on certain goods and services which are based on their own national preferences. Thirdly, the moratorium creates tax treatment that discriminates between e-commerce stores and brick-and-mortar stores. In practice, imported goods that physically enter the territory of a territory are subject to custom duties, while the importation of digital goods and services are not. Not only will this shift the consumer preferences to e-commerce stores, but it will carve out a pathway that will pervade the multilateral trading system and promote illicit trade. Illicit trade that can give rise to intellectual property right violations, transnational organized crimes, tax avoidance, all of which can be curtailed or at least screened through import declarations made at the time of customs, if custom duties are allowed. So therefore, it's not just all about percentages and mere numbers. We're not talking about the impact of trade has on lives of people and the society for tomorrow. How does this moratorium account for these mishaps, such as the infringement of common but differentiated responsibility, is a mystery, or perhaps for the proposition, a mere percentage that can be ignored. But fortunately, we are in this age of re-globalization and not liberal globalization 2.0. We're moving towards a society that can be fit for all and inclusive for all.
Thanks for the speech. Now I invite the two speakers again to start the second round of crossfire. Here.
All the estimates of lost revenue, which is relied upon by members opposing the moratorium, are based on bound tariffs instead of applied tariffs. However, several developing countries are parties to regional trade agreements and the Information Technology Agreement, which prevents them from charging tariffs at bound rates. Could you comment?
Well, the regional or the free trade agreements are itself a negotiating tool. And I think developing countries today don't stand at that age where they can compete with those who have historically plundered them and today have the capacity to understand what electronic transmissions mean. My question is, how does the proposition plan to address the inherent discrimination between physical stores and e-commerce platforms, their goods and their services, that the moratorium advances and pervades the inclusivity that you kindly argue for?
As far as the moratorium is concerned, it's important to know that it offers certainty and predictability. If your concern is about not generating enough economic growth, countries are always at liberty to apply internal taxation measures such as VAT or GST. Now, I had given an example of Chile. However, aside from just generating revenue as internal tax, Chile was also, because of the moratorium, it was able to generate exports to the tune of more than 500,000 in IT services. Thank you.
But I wonder how many of those exports are from SMEs.
Sorry, it's my turn to ask.
Yeah, go ahead.
With the increasing use of VPNs, how do you make sure that there is an effective and foolproof method of collecting customs duties?
What we need for a foolproof method is a customs administration and not a moratorium on custom duties. The requirement is for an easier, effective administration for custom duties on electronic transmissions and not a moratorium that disregards any discussion on electronic transmissions. My question to you is, how will you curb the illicit trade that can be facilitated through this moratorium? How will you control countries, or rather prevent them from defining something as electronic transmission and escaping custom duties?
When we talk of the moratorium, neither is it the cause, nor is it the solution to all the problems that a country might face. However, the moratorium is an important digital policy toolkit, which is essential for countries. And also, since you mentioned specifically about illicit trade, I wonder that we all know about digital footprints. So I would argue that it actually makes trade more transparent as opposed to simple, ordinary, traditional physical transactions. Thank you.
That's your question. Okay.
Will it be technically feasible for developing countries to impose customs duties on intangible imports? The question is, are you in a position to do this by March 26, when the present moratorium expires?
Again, like I said, what we need is a discussion on the table, and the moratorium on custom duties on electronic transmission disregards any discussion that can happen because certain countries are not open to discuss the concerns, needs, and economic capacities and developments that certain countries have, the different situations that they are in today to tackle electronic transmissions. Do we have time? My next question is that do you really think that the moratorium is inclusive to all and not just a few? Benefit for all when we have already shown to you that the moratorium is essentially favoring wealthy countries? Okay. I think
Can I
it's,
answer? Or
third. Yeah.
So we believe that the moratorium is beneficial. Since I have now only 5 seconds left, I will cite an OECD report which says that the moratorium results in a net consumer welfare of $73 million. Thank you.
Thanks for the speech. Now I invite the third speaker, Anand, from proposition side to close Rob's case. Here.
Respected Madam Moderator, my fellow debaters, dignitaries of the dais, and everyone gathered here. Good afternoon. The last half an hour should have shown you why the moratorium is still a contested issue at the WTO. So many arguments have been made, and I'm here to streamline everything for you. The entire debate boils down to two questions: who benefits from the moratorium and who loses? Let's start with the first question: who benefits from the moratorium? The second speaker especially was really concerned about the inclusivity of trade, so let's start there. It is often said that to make trade more inclusive, make it easier, faster, and less costly. You know what? The moratorium does all three. It makes trade easier by giving it predictability, faster by avoiding unwanted customs procedures, and less costly by eliminating customs duties. So the moratorium is not against the idea of inclusive trade. It is what makes trade inclusive. The tech giants that Speaker 1 from the opposition referred to are the ones who can still manage to trade in an unpredictable, bureaucratic, costly trading environment without the moratorium. The ones that will miss out will be the smallest of enterprises. And these enterprises are the same which are critical to several developing and least developed countries. According to the World Economic Forum, 90% of all businesses, 2/3 of all business employment, and half of value-added trade globally comes from micro, medium, and small enterprises. There is also another massive segment of the beneficiaries which the opposition has overlooked: consumers, like you and me. Digital trade is so ingrained in our daily lives that starting from our morning news to even probably paying for the lunch you had here today, you relied on digital trade. Look at the setting we have here. The first speaker from the opposition again was concerned about whether the transmission that we have right now, the live streaming, is covered within the moratorium. In fact, my parents are watching it live all the way from India. They are benefiting from the moratorium as I speak. We all do. Having said all this, the opposition obviously mentioned that developing countries are giving up too much to benefit from the moratorium. Well, what are they really giving up? Let's go one by one. First to come up was the loss of policy space to digitally industrialize. One thing we know for sure is that imposing customs duties on electronic transmissions will do two things. One, it will disrupt your domestic supply chains. Two, it will make your exports less competitive. So developing countries should not be seeing the moratorium as something that hinders their industrial policy, but as a core component of it. The second argument to come up was the issue of revenue losses. Well, the opposition looks only one side of the coin, revenue losses. If you flip the coin, you will see that this is cost saved by consumers. My previous speaker explained how the revenue loss is anyway not significant enough to outweigh the economic gains. Regardless, imposing duties on electronic transmissions will slow down digital trade and over the period reduce the revenue that you generate from it. On the other hand, what the moratorium does is it encourages economic growth, encourages employment generation, and creates an additional source of revenue for governments. So what the opposition wants to do is kill the goose that lays the golden egg. The third argument that came up was the need to address illicit trade. Absolutely, that is an important concern. But it is important to understand that the moratorium only eliminates customs duties. If you have a problem with illicit trade, you can definitely have customs procedures. Indonesia has one already in place. Having said all this, there is one concern that was raised by the opposition to which I cannot disagree. The issue of digital divide. It is definitely a concern. But it is important to note that the moratorium neither created the digital divide, nor will it solve it. The opposition could very well argue that the revenue you generate could be invested in digital infrastructure. But we have to understand that even with the most liberal estimates, the collective revenue loss because of the moratorium is $14 billion a year. According to the International Telecommunications Union, we have to invest more than $400 billion by 2030 to address the digital divide. The opposition is barking up the wrong tree. I really wish the moratorium was the answer to all our problems, but it sadly isn't. What the moratorium does is that whoever has access to the infrastructure is integrated into the international trading system. Here's the underlying point. Support the moratorium because it does not leave any country worse off and makes most of them better off. And don't just take my word for it. More than 80 countries, several of them which are developing countries, have made the moratorium permanent on a bilateral basis in their regional trade agreements. There is even a push at the WTO to make it even more permanent. So this is my request to the audience here. Let's not be derailed by the opposition's arguments on revenue losses or policy space or sovereignty, but really focus on the fruits that the moratorium continues to bear. And when you focus on that, there is only one clear answer. Let's renew the moratorium. Thank you.
Thanks for the speech. Now I call upon the third speaker from opposition side, Jingle, to close ops case here.
So, ladies and gentlemen, today we stand here at a pivotal juncture as we deliberate the future of WTO's moratorium on customs duties for electronic transmissions. This policy, though well-intentioned, has inadvertently deepened the chasm between the haves and have-nots in the digital arena, tilting the scales in favor of most developed countries while leaving some least developed countries to bear the brunt of its consequences. Yes, this name, the least developed countries, has not come from our opponents. They have never mentioned them. They just give some fancy words that try to minimize the effect of not having the moratorium and the benefits of moratorium. Well, I will help you reflect on the stark reality faced by the least developed nations, like Zambia, Zimbabwe, 45 of them. Between 2017 and 2020, these 4 years, these countries experienced a tariff revenue loss of $56 billion on imports of digitizable products, which means the books can be transferred into ebooks and other things. This loss is not merely a statistic. It represents the erosion of a fiscal lifeline crucial for these nations' development agenda. I will tell them that the moratorium could be less costly economically, but it's much more costly in other ways. Let's see the case of Zambia. Zambia's GDP fell from 2017 of $21 billion to 2020 only $16 billion. While within these 4 years, it lost a revenue of $202 million because of the moratorium. What does this number mean? It means that they could have built over 200 schools or over 80 hospitals in its rural areas. This loss represents not more than economic challenge. It severely impacts the educational and healthcare opportunities for those people living in the least developed areas. The disparity does not end with the revenue loss. As we speak, developed countries are leaps and bounds ahead, investing in and benefiting from advanced digital technologies like AI and big data. Of course, you can name a few: Apple, Google, OpenAI, ChatGPT. I think most of the people use them in daily lives. But they're all from developed countries. It's very hard for us to name a few big names in digital area from least developed countries. Well, as our team have told you, the least developed countries remain tethered by inadequate ICT infrastructure and very minimal internet penetration. Still look at Zambia. The 4G network coverage is only 0.46%. This number in most developed countries is over 90%. The moratorium on customs duties, far from leveling the playing field, it actively undermines these nations' ability to develop their digital industries, which is the key drivers for economic independence in the digital area and for electronic transmissions. What does this mean? These mean that the moratorium does not bring inclusivity, but it's widening the digital divide. Okay, now let's look again on the VAT or GST, which our opponent has mentioned. VAT, more often than not, it burdens the very citizens of those developing and least developed nations rather than the foreign enterprises who export their goods with better technology and lower cost to those emerging markets. While by contrast, customs duties is a tool for equity, designed to ensure that some foreign digital products do not enjoy an undue advantage over local products of those least developed countries. Well, we must reassess the continuation of this moratorium. Perpetuating this policy without adjustments is supporting a system where a few nations control the digital progress. Well, the WTO was created for globalization, to ensure fair and equitable trade. But now, this moratorium is compromising the foundational principles of WTO, as our evidence have shown you. It is breaking the world apart, leaving the least developed nations to suffer in most of the cases. The opponent mentioned that ITU said it would cost a lot to reduce and narrow the digital divide, but we are not narrowing just within 1 year. This would take time, but this does not change our side that the moratorium on customs duties for electronic transmissions should stop renewing. At this critical juncture of regularization, the WTO should reevaluate the development needs and the economic realities of all member states, especially including those least developed nations, not only developing countries. We need alternatives to uphold fair competition and allow every nation to develop in digital capabilities, ensuring full and equitable participation in the global digital economy. The path forward is clear. We should stop renewing the moratorium and act now to promote true global digital economy equity. And we are on the side for better trade and a better world.
Thanks for the speech. Now I invite the two speakers to have the last round of crossfire. You can start when you're ready.
Can the speaker kindly explain how terminating the moratorium would assist in addressing the issue of digital divide, considering how limited the revenue generated would be?
Yes, sorry. As we have mentioned, the revenue loss in those least developed countries is very large, which these revenue loss could be regained from the customs duties, which could help them to build their internet infrastructure. So my question for you is, as our data from Zambia have shown that the moratorium is depriving education and medical rights for people from least developed countries. Do you agree that the moratorium is actually hurting some people living in the least developed countries?
Absolutely not. I would disagree with that. Especially in least developed countries, they benefit extremely because of the moratorium, because they get access to duty-free imports. And if you specifically mentioned educational services, during COVID, we saw how just a mobile phone was access to education for a lot of people from impoverished regions of the world. So the moratorium actually benefits them more than it hurts. My question would be, how do you explain the growing trend among developing countries of making the moratorium permanent in their regional trade agreements if they are economically being harmed by the moratorium?
Thank you. I've already said that we mostly speak for the least developed countries. Our evidence have shown that many least developed countries is being hurt. Of course, some developed countries might be benefiting from the moratorium, but a lot of the least developed countries are being hurt by the moratorium. Okay, my second question is, our evidence have already shown that the internet connection coverage in some least developed countries is very low. So you mentioned that they benefit from electronic transmissions for online education. They do not even get access to internet. How do you respond to that?
See, as I explained in my speech, we are not looking at moratorium as the sole reason to everything in the digital space. The moratorium is just one aspect of the wider regime on digital trade that we have to develop at the multilateral level, but the moratorium will be a key component of the regime that we develop. Since you had a specific interest for LDCs, I will point out too. How do you explain the involvement of LDCs like Benin and Burkina Faso in the JSI on e-commerce, which seeks to make the moratorium permanent and not just renew it for 2 years?
This question, to some least developed countries, is quite complicated problem because some of them are being helped by some developed countries. Some of them are politically relying on those developed countries. Some of them have changed their perspectives on this because they don't want to lose the help from those developed nations. But our case from the Zambia have already shown you that their case, they are actually being hurted. Okay, my third question is that the moratorium was introduced in 1998, and given the dramatic changes in global digital landscape and the rise of big techs and deepening digital divide, why shouldn't the moratorium be reevaluated and stop for now to adjust and just reconsider?
The moratorium is actually reevaluated every 2 years at the ministerial conference. And for the last 26 years, members have by consensus agreed that it is for the common benefit of the trading system that we renew the moratorium. And hopefully that will continue in 2026 as well. My question to you is, you specifically referred to the example of Zambia. If for a country which is probably going through a tough time economically, wouldn't it be best to reduce cost on consumers, and to do that, reducing customs duties or eliminating them is the best option ahead?
I've already said that their GDP is decreasing, so they are experiencing a really hard time. And while their GDP is decreasing, they are still experiencing a tax revenue loss, which means that it hurts the consumers in those countries. They are not benefiting from the moratorium. And my last question is, in what ways do you believe the moratorium helps the efforts of least developed countries? You provide any evidence?
Thanks for the crossfire, and jury, you can now decide the scores for the debaters based on their performance. And so unfortunately, because of the time constraint, we cannot have the reply speech. Now I will give the floor to Dimitri to have the closing remark. Thanks, debaters, for the great debate.
Oh, we can.
Okay.
Oh, I went to the place. I wanted to ask that the last one, when I opened my mouth, I just forgot it.
It's okay.
I invite Dmitry Grozybinski to give the closing remarks while the jury deliberates.
Hello, everyone. Isabel, are you in here from WTA? Do you want to come join me? We can do this as a collective. My name is Dmitry Grozybinski. I'm from the Geneva Trade Platform, which is based here at the Graduate Institute. And so half of the students you saw up here today are from Outpatch. But this year we are joined by WTI, a fellow Swiss trade institution. And so collaboratively, it is a intra-university debate. I hope you all enjoyed that as much as I did. I know our judges have a very, very difficult job to try to decide who did better out of the two teams. We are tremendously proud of all of the teams, but I wanted to just perhaps give a little bit of insight into how much work the Shruti and her entire team and all of the debaters have put into this. They have been rehearsing this for weeks. They have studiously studied an issue that is so complicated that most delegations try to pass it on to another one of their colleagues rather than engage in it. They had mock debates to practice the very engaging format that we saw today, and they have just generally been toiling at this in order to have this opportunity to play out this discussion in front of all of you. We couldn't be prouder of all of them. If there were things that they said today that that there were arguments that you heard that resonated with you, feel free to borrow them in the relevant committees. If there were ones that you disagreed, I always look at this as a teachable moment. Some of the smartest young people in Switzerland spent weeks researching this topic, and the arguments that you heard here today were the result. This is how the issue that you care about is playing among people who take the time to learn about it. I think that is relevant to all of us, but I wanted to hand over to you just to say a few words on behalf of WTI.
Certainly, thank you so much. It's been great to participate in this year's edition of the competition. And the World Trade Institute, we really hope that competition will continue to grow and that in the future we can have many more teams, many more universities also participating. What we really liked about this idea is that it's a debating competition. And there's many different types of competition focusing on WTO, but especially WTO law. But actually, we have people from political science backgrounds, economics backgrounds, and lawyers working on many of these issues. And so it's been nice to see this initiative for a debate because we can bring people with many different backgrounds to the WTO to work on these issues and to debate them. And that's not always the case, of course, when we're dealing with, for example, a moot court competition. And so that's what really was very appealing for us as an interdisciplinary institute to participate in this competition. A final word about kind of the work that goes into it. It's been really, I've admired the students for all the work they've done. They told me just now that before the start of the competition that they actually now know more about this topic than their actual graduate thesis, which is a bit worrying. But I do hope, and I would encourage both teams that with all the research you've done, try to write something now also kind of reflecting the experience of participating in a debate, but also the substantive arguments that you've presented from both sides so that more people can also benefit from your work. I'm not sure if we're supposed to talk until the judges have finished their deliberations, but again, thank you so much for the opportunity.
I think this becomes like a news program when the foreign feed is out and we're supposed to just ramble on until they come back. But hopefully they are almost done with their deliberations. While we are giving out thanks, one group of unsung heroes is, I know certainly at WTI, and I suspect at the Graduate Institute as well, the teams had mentors and researchers and advisors that helped them out as well. And they are all, many of them are seated over there. So feel free to all collectively look at them right now. In order to make them feel awkward. I want to really sort of thank WTI, and I want to thank the WTO as well. This is the second year we're doing this, and this is, for those of you who have been coming to public forums for a while, this is not a standard WTO session. Last year, the e-commerce moratorium is one of the hottest issues at the WTO. Last year, we had the students debating carbon border adjustments, and specifically the EU's CBAM. To put two teams of young people on stage, half of whom will be calling the European Union names, took courage on the part of the WTO Secretariat, but I think it was courage that was borne out by a phenomenal, respectful debate that I think really kind of illustrated the depth of the issues, as well as how seriously our young leaders are taking their role in taking up the mantle of trade policy. So we really appreciate the WTO sort of giving us the first opportunity, giving us the second opportunity, WTI coming on board to make it broader than just an internal graduate institute fight. So hopefully the two teams don't see each other in the hole like Jets and Sharks. And so we're just tremendously grateful to everyone for putting this together and to the teams for all of their hard work. I think a round of applause for the WTO, and Shruti's coming back. We may have put one too many trade lawyers on the jury. They may be coming back in sort of 6 years with a 40,000 page report for the WTO appellate body to unpick. But I'm hoping they are getting close. Shruti, are they anywhere near complete?
But I need them
To actually return.
Yes.
Okay, well, hopefully there they are. They're on their way back. The lawyers need clarification.
Alrighty, thank you everyone for being patient. The deliberation is done. I know who's won, and I'm sure you all have an idea. If you don't agree with the judges, please feel free to stay back and test them and test us as well. And for the prize distribution, I invite Dimitri and Isabel and our jury as well to stand in front. While I call out the names of the debaters one by one, so you can receive your award, and then I will announce the best speakers, okay, I gave it away, and then the winning team. So I invite the jury and our dignitaries in front of the stage. Yasmin, Dr. Paulson, and Dr. Remy. All right. I invite so we've got two best speakers. I invite Gauri Tyagi from WTI to come and receive her award. Yeah, Dimitri. And our second best speaker, I invite Anand Nandakumar to receive his award. And the debaters one by one. Anand, please stay and receive your medal and certificate. Oh, no, at the very end. Yeah. I invite Gauri to receive her medal. Keep the applause going. Thank you. And Francisco. And from the Geneva Graduate Institute, I invite Argadeep. Tanya Khanna. And of course, last but not least, Jingle Fu. Okay, 2 more minutes. I am pleased to invite the winning team of the second edition of the Geneva debate at the Public Forum, the proposition from the World Trade Institute, Ben. And the research assistant, Nikki, as well, who's been guiding the entire team, acting as debate coach. Congratulations. All right, thank you so much. Congratulations once again. I hope to see you all next year. I would like to say same time, but maybe not, but same room. We'll see you. I'm so happy for the debaters. Last night we had a very communal dinner with some good Eritrean food and no hands were thrown, but some words were thrown in this afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us. Please stay back and talk to us if you'd like something. If you liked something, if you didn't like something that was said, we promise we won't bite. Have a good one.